super funds have delivered their third straight year of strong returns, with shares rallying in the final quarter to push full-year earnings up to double digits. After all the market volatility, that's a great result for the superannuation sector. For more on this, I'm joined by Kirby Rappell, the Executive Director of SuperRatings. Kirby, thanks for your time. I mean, how tumultuous a year has it been for investors?
Look, what a year. I don't think we'd all would have guessed we'd end up at double digits. If we look first 7 months in, we're up about 8%. Then we're down to plus 1% a couple of months later, and now we end up at 10%. So what a roller coaster it's been.
It really started back in July, August, the US election. There was a lot of positivity around Trump being a pro-business president, and that really helped the market at that point, didn't it?
Yeah, look, there was a lot of running into Christmas where we were seeing really good returns. I think we're really happy to see that plus 8%. I think everyone's just holding their breath to see how the rest of the year played out, but it's been good to see that the market has been running pretty hard.
Obviously, April, there was the big Liberation Day tariffs announcement. Trump's holding up the clipboard with all these different countries on the screen, and markets just completely dived. I remember checking my super balance, logging in and going, oh my God, what's going on?
I think that is one of the stories of the year. Lots of people checking their super much more often. I think everyone gets pretty nervous. I remember during COVID, even during the GFC, you see these market falls and everyone starts to get pretty nervous. But I think if we probably zoom out for a second, over the past 16 years, since the bottom of the GFC, there's actually only been 3 negative returns.
Wow.
And only 5 since 1992. So I think it is good to see if you're going to hold the course, it pays off. But geez, you've got to hold your nerve these days.
Yeah, so median balance fund, roughly 10.1%. I mean, how good is that historically?
Yeah, so we've actually got a lot of over 10% returns year on year. Since 1992, average returns about 7%. Okay. So it's ahead of objective, so I think that's great. But even now, with far less super funds, we're expecting a range in that balanced universe of about 7% to 14%. So you can see it still pays to be checking your super.
And who's the sort of average Aussie that would have a median balance fund? Because you presume younger people would try and go for the high growth. Who's on the median?
Look, there's 2 ways the market's currently running. For a lot of funds, particularly those profit for member funds, they're usually in a 70-30 style portfolio. And so that's usually where most of the Australians still sit. Increasingly, we're seeing some of the retail funds moving towards a lifestyle fund, so it's more 90, 100% growth assets. They've had a really strong last 3 years, greater exposure to equities, both here and overseas. And you have found that that's been the trade that's really been paying off for people.
Yeah, looking at equities, the Magnificent Seven in the US has really been a big thing that's lifted people's balances for quite a while. I mean, how did that fare in the recent financial year?
Look, if you asked me 2 months ago, I'd probably be a bit less positive than I am again now. But I think it's good to see that, that trade seems to be continuing to roar back. Obviously, there's a huge focus on AI and digitalisation. That brings risks for everyone. But this year, it's been very much around being in the right stocks here and overseas has really driven returns. I think the question I've got is, well, has everyone got a bit numb to risk? If you're a 40-year-old, the last recession in Australia, you're in year 1 at school. So from that side, I think at some point risk is going to come back, but we've seen another year where it's all about return.
And just looking at some big Australian stocks, Commonwealth Bank, I mean, their shares are trading basically at all-time record highs. Yeah. Just talk about the success of that business over the last 12 months.
Look, I think you do find that for a business that can have a strong moat, and a strong competitive position and be able to show out, continue to excel in its given field. There is that demand there and a greater focus from overseas as well. So from that side, I think it's very much about being in the right stocks with a couple of stocks really driving the market.
And how big a role have super funds played in the success of ASX 200 stocks like CBA?
Look, there's a huge amount of focus with every single Australian super fund and how much is in the Aussie market. I think the actual pressure now is where do they go overseas? Because there's probably saturation in Australian stocks for many super funds now, and creates a real interesting conundrum that we're all pretty parochial Aussies, but at the same time, increasingly, we're having to turn farther afield through the UK, probably a little bit less in the US at the moment, but looking overseas to make sure that we are getting those opportunities and taking super to the world.
Yeah, well, Trump's big, beautiful bill is happening right now, voting. But one thing was Section 899 proposal, which has been removed. And that would have been a deterrent for Aussie super funds in America. And it seems like now that that's clear, they'll be more likely to probably tip more investments into the United States market.
Look, well, I think it's been a really good year for super. I think the pressure is on. How do super funds over the next 30 years replicate the success they've had over the past 30? It's a pretty high bar. And I think everyday Australians are relying on it.
And are you expecting to see more and more consolidation within the superannuation sector? Because just 10, 20 years ago, there were so many more funds out there.
Yeah, so over the past 15 years, there was about 1,500 super funds back then. We're now down to well under 100, probably under 70. You will see it happen. I think the key thing that's really important for the industry and for the regulatory settings is we want to keep seeing the right level of innovation. Super funds are doing a good job. They need to figure out ways to be doing better. And you really need to ensure there's that right settings in the system to keep driving it forwards. And
I just had ASIC Deputy Chair Sarah Cord on earlier talking about self-managed super in particular. Is that a real growth sector as well? Are more people having self-managed funds?
A real conundrum is that people get more engaged with their super. They want to do more things with their super. The key challenge here is making sure there's those right guardrails and risk sort of focuses. Going into the GFC, average balance was 40 grand. Now it's about 150. It's a real challenge to find the right balance.
Kirby, Rappell, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.